In celebration of the New York Giants 100th season, we have another special for you. And what's better than to live the history by seeing pieces of the history? Jeffrey Payne, our vintage collector friend, has come with some of his great stuff on the Giants from almost 100 years ago, and Jeff tells us all about it in just a moment.
This is the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch, a podcast that covers the anniversaries of American football events throughout history. Your host, Darren Hayes, is podcasting from America's North Shore to bring you the memories of the gridiron, one day at a time.
Hello, my football friends. This is Darren Hayes of pigskindispatch.com. Welcome once again to the Pig Pen, your report of positive football history, and welcome to another edition of a collector's corner of sorts. We have our friend Jeffrey Payne with us from the vintage football community, and Jeff has some great things to share with us for our celebration of the New York Giants 100th season coming up in 2024. And Jeff, welcome back to the Pig Pen.
It's great to be here, Darren. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, Jeff, you shared an email with me. You knew we were celebrating a lot of Giants items and been a kind of a popular event for us. And you really have some neat things in your collection that really fall right in with what we've been talking about here the last 13, 14 episodes on our NYG 100 series.
Yeah, that's totally cool. Yeah, we can start as early as you want to go. You tell me where you want to begin.
Well, you take us back as far as you can and let's go. We'll go chronologically. How's that sound?
That sounds cool. Yeah, I don't know how much you've talked about it already, but obviously the New York Giants 1925 was actually not the first professional team in New York City, and they weren't even the first NFL team in New York City, which a lot of people don't know. There was an NFL team that was earlier than them. They actually were formed before the NFL in 1919. They went by the name of the New York Brickley Giants for two reasons. One is the New York baseball Giants funded the team, and Charles Brickley, who was a two-time All-American at Harvard in the mid-teens, very well known in the Northeast, he was kind of the person who put it all together. And back then, of course, it was very common for teams to put the name of their star in their name, like Nevers, was often mentioned for the Duluth Eskimos, and Thorpe's name worked its way in a few times in some of the teams. So it wasn't uncommon for, teams to try to use their star's name to, attract
Red Grange's Yankees and
exactly. Yeah. And so, they called themselves the New York Brickley Giants. And actually in 1919, they ended up not playing any games because, at the time, that was back when there were the blue laws where you couldn't play and do things on Sunday. Well, in 1919, New York City passed a law that you were allowed to play baseball on Sundays. So the New York baseball Giants were like, oh, that's cool. Well, maybe we should create a football team and play football on Sundays after the baseball season ends. And that's how they kind of hooked up with Charles Brickley. But unfortunately, New York City was like, no. We just meant baseball. We didn't mean football. And they apparently got their whole team organized and structured and everything. And they were just about to play their first game. And they found out they weren't allowed to play on Sundays. And that's just they just said, forget it. We're disbanding. We're disbanding the team if that's the case, because we want to play on Sunday when nobody's working. So, so that transpired. And then they went dormant for a couple of years. And then in 1921, popped back up. It wasn't the New York baseball Giants this time. It was what was his name? Billy Gibson. Billy Gibson. He was a boxing promoter in New York City, and he heard about the NFL. He thought, hey, there ought to be a team in New York City, and he and Charles Brickley again got together, and Billy Gibson funded it, and Brickley was the coach and the player coach, and I think he owned part of it too. And they, entered the NFL that season. They have the distinction of being the team that played the second least games in NFL history. They only played 2 NFL games. They lost them both. And then they folded, or they dropped out of the league. They were still around as an independent team for a while.
Well, real quick, do you know the name of the team that played the least amount?
Oh, sure. Tonawanda.
Yeah,
Uh,
okay. The
yeah.
Lumberjacks or
The
the
Lumberjacks or
Cardex.
Cardex or
Cardex.
whoever they
Yeah.
went for. Yeah. They
Yeah.
played one game and dropped out, and the Brickley Giants played two. Yeah, I actually have a postcard of one of the Tonawanda players.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I've been outgunned several times when they've come up on eBay. There's probably, I don't know, a handful of people in the world that when they see those things, they know what they are.
Hmm.
But there's always one other person that knows it too, and always seems to outgun me. But I finally got my hands on one probably a
I know
year or
two
so
or
ago.
three Buffalo, New York, Western New York collectors.
Yeah.
Probably
Oh
some of
yeah.
the people you're bidding against.
Yes. Yeah. I know where many of them live, which is fine. I just happened to finally get one, so I was pretty happy about that because that's a cool story too. That
Right. Yeah,
they
we'll have
were
to talk about that
the
sometime
team.
too.
Yeah. No, that's
Yeah.
awesome. I do have a couple of nice images of Charles Brickley if you want me to
Yeah,
pop
go
them
ahead.
up
You have the
and
share
show you.
screen capability. Please do.
Cool. Let me do that. Let me see the easiest way to do that. I think I'll just share screen and just pop them up. Probably easiest here. All right, should be coming up for you. Can you see it? My screen?
Hold on a second. Yep, there we go.
Yeah, so here's Charles Brickley. Yeah, and when he played for the Massillon Tigers in Ohio. So after Harvard, he played for Massillon for a few years. And this is just a great shot of an early early professional player who was very well known. This shows him obviously kicking, or maybe, it looks like maybe even a drop kick because he's not lifting his leg very high. But 1917 Massillon Tigers, Charles
Wow,
Brickley in
nice.
action, right?
You can tell he's a little older in these days.
Well, yeah, when you see him later, he gained some weight. I was gonna I had to look at it. I was like, is this even the same dude? Like he looks like he bounced up and down too. Maybe lost his baby fat and he got a little thinner, and then later on he put some more weight on here, as you'll
Maybe
see
he was
here. And this,
on some of the diets that Oprah was, how she was gaining weight and losing weight all the time. You
there
never
you
know.
go. Now this, you'll notice he's a little bit chunkier in this picture. This is from his high school or his college days. So this is when he was at Harvard.
Oh yeah.
He looks bigger here to me. His face is thin, but he
Yeah,
looks
a little
bigger.
thicker maybe in the midsection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Could you,
that's his coach, Percy Houghton, who's a Hall of Fame coach and coached at Harvard for many years. So this is
yeah,
you know,
great photo.
mid teams photo of him. And then I do have one actually from 1919 when he was trying to get the Giants off the ground. Unfortunately, since they didn't play, it's not of him with the Giants, but instead it's with him showing Fordham University players how to kick. You'll notice that
Nice.
almost all of Brickley's photos are him kicking the ball.
Right.
That was, obviously back then kicking was so important in the game of football, particularly before passing was even allowed. But even in these days, passing was not, done frequently. It was more desperation and the rules didn't really support it. So, teams were punting very frequently. You needed a good kicker. You needed somebody who could pin them down and make them go the distance because that was almost impossible to do. And so, players like Brickley, Thorpe was another one who were known for their
Mm-hmm.
kicking prowess. They also were both great drop kickers. You needed that kicker, right? In fact,
Right.
a story about the 1921 team, one of the two NFL teams that the Brickley Giants did play was Thorpe's Cleveland team. Sometimes they went by the Indians, sometimes they went by the Tigers, sometimes they went by the Thorpes. I swear, they used all sorts of
Was
names.
it the Oorang team or was it
No,
the Cleve
now
straight up
Oorang
Cleveland?
was 22
Okay.
and 23. This was
Okay.
Cleveland Tigers / Indians / whatever. They seem to change their name every so often, but they played one of the only two NFL games that the Brickley Giants played, and they played at the Polo Grounds. And the reason people know this game is because Thorpe and Brickley put on a kicking exhibition. And there's
Huh.
actually a photo out there. I don't own it. I know if you Google it, it is out there. You'll see it because it's posted a few places. It shows both of them kind of getting ready to punt. It was probably staged, but they put on a kicking exhibition. And apparently there's some controversy about who won that. Some accounts say Brickley kicked, they were drop kicking and kicking field goals. And some say Brickley kicked the farthest one. And somebody else said, no, on this last try, Thorpe surpassed him and won it. Of course, back then it was anything to get a fan in the stadiums. And, they often did kicking exhibitions and just any kind of entertainment imaginable, right? Like, you mentioned the Oorang Indians, they always used to bring their dogs out from the kennel and have them do tricks and do other things. I even heard they used to tree a bear. If there was a tree around, they'd get a bear out there, and it sounded kind of crazy to me, but that's the kind of stuff they were doing back then for entertainment.
They had to do something to compete against the college game. So pulling out all the stops was one way to do it. So yeah, very interesting. Very cool pictures.
Yep.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, they didn't make it, but as I'm sure and people probably heard, then of course in 25 the actual New York Giants came along that are not affiliated at all with the Brickley Giants, so their histories aren't aligned.
But there's a little bit of history though involved, because we've learned that from Alan March, who's the great grandson of Dr. Harry March, that and it's also recorded in Dr. March's writings, his famous book on early football history, that Dr. March and Tim Mara, or before they approached Tim Mara, Joe Carr and March went to Billy Gibson to try to get him to fund the New York team. And he didn't want it. He had a bad taste in his mouth, I guess, from the previous experience, and stayed with boxing. And Mara took the chance on it. So,
well, cool. And I feel kind of bad for Billy Gibson, because the reason he took the team in 21 was because the NFL staged an exhibition game in late 2020 or 1920. Sorry, wrong century. In 1920. Between, I think it was the Canton Bulldogs and it was the Buffalo All-Americans. And so they were two good teams in the league, and they had an exhibition game in New York City, and they had 20,000 people show up. So, Joe Carr's like, wow, New York City, biggest city in America, right? We need a team here. And he, Billy Gibson was like, wow, boy, people really like football. I'm all in, and, paid the money and then sunk like a rock. So, I think the promise was there, right? I mean, that game showed that if you had the right teams or right audience or right situation, people would show up in New York. But I think Billy Gibson was like, nah, you got me once on this. I'm not doing it again. But to your point, of course, he introduced Joe Carr to Tim Mara. And, as I understand it, Dr. March's grandson, right? Grandson, is that what?
Great grandson, I believe.
Great grandson would know better than I do, certainly. But my understanding was Mara said, I don't know anything about football at all. Like, this sounds cool. I'm a sportsman. And he, reached out to find out who could help him put together a team and who knew something about football to help him out. And he, pulled in Dr. March, and who really orchestrated everything and got the players and did all the heavy lifting, because Mara's like, I don't know anything about the sport, I need somebody to.
I think the rest of his quote was because there was a $500 entrance fee that Carr was charging to get in. He said, God, anything's worth a bet on $500, so or something to that effect. So
yep,
that had to be a good chunk of change back in 1920s. $500.
I read it was it equates to, I just read it, somewhere between 10 and 20,000 maybe in today's dollars. So it wasn't a huge amount of money, but still, hey, it's not something usually lying around. You're just like throwing to the wind. But no, Mara did it, and here we are, right? 100 years later, and they've
added quite a bit to football, that's for sure.
Yeah, no, the Giants are obviously an iconic franchise. It's so cool that we're starting to see 100-year anniversaries for these teams now, right?
Amazing.
We got some coming up in the early 30s as well, right?
Right, yeah.
Those are all coming up, and of course this year is also the Pottsville Maroons, one of my loves, their 100th year anniversary of their start in the and almost end in the NFL.
in the
So
NFL, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
so it's
very,
cool
very cool.
to see teams that are that old. Um,
Yeah,
um,
who'd have thought?
yeah, I know, right? And I love the story about the Grange game. Of course, that's pretty well published and legendary of, Grange coming into New York City and, playing against the Giants. And, the numbers I saw, and you all might have covered it, was I think Mara was something like $40,000 in the hole at the end of that first season. And they'd had a good year. I think they lost their first 3 games, NFL games, and then they won like 7 in a row. I mean, they had a pretty stinking good year for their first year in the league, but they couldn't draw enough to break even. And what I heard was Mara was really on the fence about how long am I going to do this? If it's going to be a 40,000 year, $40,000 investment every year, I can't do that very very long. And everybody says that more or less Grange and the Bears coming into New York playing that infamous game that drew what, close to 70,000 fans, they estimate.
Yeah, there's between 70 and 74,000. There's
Yeah,
been different
it's
reports, and the
incredible.
nation
They
weren't
stopped
super
counting,
accurate.
I think.
Yeah,
It's just
they
like
ran out of
they're like,
fingers and toes.
woohoo! Yeah, that kind of saved the year, right? Saved the
Yeah,
franchise, maybe. It's
yeah, and I
possible that
probably
Mara would
saved
have given up.
football in New York, for sure.
Yeah, they would have had to gone back to Billy Gibson again and see what he
Yeah,
can wrestle up next, right?
yeah,
I
exactly.
do have a couple of cool things from some of the players on that first team. Now, I don't have anything that shows Thorpe on that team because he did play for them early on in the season. I think that was Mara's first attempt at, hey, I'm gonna bring in a name, hopefully a draw. And, yeah, I don't remember what he was paying Thorpe, but I'm sure it wasn't cheap because Thorpe didn't play for cheap. Didn't matter how old he was. He wasn't playing for cheap. Um, but he didn't play very much. He was just too old, just too injured, too broken down. And I don't remember how many games he was involved, but Mara cut him loose at some point and they just agreed to part ways because he wasn't helping the team and they were losing so much money that, it just didn't make sense for him to stay engaged. Ironically, I have a photo of Dutch Hendrian, who was another player on the team, old school pro. I don't have it with me right now, but it's really skinny, tall and skinny. And I always
Okay.
wondered why it was cut like that. Well, it's actually a picture that has Thorpe in it too. It's Hendrian and Thorpe and like one or two other dudes in a row on the field. Somebody cut it up, sold it off. I'm sure they sold the Thorpe out from under it. So I can say I have part of a photo of Thorpe, but it doesn't show photo of Thorpe in it. You got to like imagine he's next to him, when you look at it,
You
because
just
it
have like
just
his
just
hand or
shows
something.
exactly, just shows Dutch Hendry. But I've seen the full photo, and I'm like, man, I wish I had that full photo because that's pretty cool.
Yeah,
But
that
two
would be.
players I'm sure you all have talked about, which I really admire, and they were definitely stars of that team, were Hinky Haynes and Jack McBride. Of course, you and
Absolutely.
I being Pennsylvania boys, we love the fact both those boys grew up in Pennsylvania,
Hmm.
so,
Yeah.
um, Hinky Haynes was from, I think, Red Lion. That's where he grew
Yeah,
up.
I think so.
I think that's it. I actually wrestled a kid from Red Lion in college. Never wrestled anybody from there in high school, but I wrestled him in college. I think he went to Lock Haven or Bloomsburg or somewhere. So I knew Red Lion. They had good wrestling programs. And Jack McBride was from closer to Philly, down by Conshohocken, which is like between like Valley Forge and Philly-ish, sort of. So they were both Pennsylvania boys, which go
Yeah.
PA, right? Go
Yeah.
PA.
Surprised
And
that
of
the
course,
Anthracite League didn't like snatch him up, 'cause they were
I
going strong
know,
then.
right? Yeah, well, I think Haynes played for one of the semi-pro teams earlier in the 20s. I'm going to say a Philly team, maybe like the Quakers. There was a independent team in Philly that was pretty big at that time. I
They
think
had
it
like
was
Union Club of Phoenixville,
something like that. Yeah, Union Quakers or
Frankfurt.
something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
He played there, but I don't think either of them played in the anthracite league. of course, I love trivia, right? Like what team played the, fewest NFL games. Of course, Hinkie Haynes' claim to fame is, I believe he's the only player that won a World Series and an NFL championship.
That's right.
Of course, Deion Sanders made it to the World Series, and he won several NFL championships, Super Bowls. Didn't win the World Series though. Wasn't with the Braves when they won, so he doesn't qualify. So yeah, Hinkie Haynes is the only one. Great, great trivia question for you all
Yeah,
football guys. And there's not a lot of Hinkie Haynes stuff out there. I mean, I've seen some photos and stuff like that. I have one thing from Hinkie Haynes, which is kind of cool. Let me share my screen again real quick, and I'll bring it up. And it's a baseball item, actually. It's
Oh
Colt's
yeah.
Mother's Bread pin. Hinkie Haynes with the Yankees in 23. He only played 1 year in the major leagues, so he was fortunate enough to play with the Yanks and win the World Series.
What does the F stand for? Like fielder or?
No, well, he was a center fielder. But his first name is Frank or Fred.
Oh,
I
okay.
don't know if that's the position or his first initial. I don't
Okay.
know because he was a center fielder. So I'm like, okay, does that mean they were designating he was a fielder, or is that designated that his first name was whatever it is? Start with an F. I know that.
Yeah, it probably is
Because it
'cause it's the
wasn't
same color
Hinky.
as his last name. It's probably his first initial. Yeah, it's good
It could
thought.
be. Yeah, I'd
Very,
have to find
very
another.
cool.
They did a bunch of Mother's Bread did a bunch of pins that year of players. So yeah, so one of the things I collect is kind of a sub collection. You and I may have talked about it. Is I call it footballers in other sports, and I
Hmm.
have this huge checklist of every player that I've ever been able to find that played professional football all the way back to the 1800s, but also has something from another sport. A lot of it's baseball, right? You've got the Patty Driscolls and the Ernie Nevers and those guys who all played baseball, and they've got various cards. Um, but occasionally you find some kind of cool items like this as well. It's the only Hinkie Haynes item that I've
How
seen that I
about one of
have.
my favorites, Jack Hayden, who would have been turn of the century,
Yep,
played for the Franklin team I wrote about, and I think he played for Connie Mack and the Philadelphia Athletics
absolutely.
in baseball. Yeah.
Yep. So that's my Hinkie Haynes. I have a couple of Jack McBride. He's the other guy. Of course, he didn't stay in state. Hinkie Haynes went to Penn State, by the way. So he's a Nittany Lion. Hashtag we are. But he was a baseball and football player at Penn State. Did really well in that. But McBride left the state. He left the Philly area, went to Syracuse, and had a good career up there in Syracuse before he drifted back, over to New York. I have a couple of things from him that I
This
like.
was like, and Haynes and McBride in those first few Giants teams. That was their rushing special. That was their backfield
Yes.
mates too.
Yep. They were backfield mates. And also, back in that day, they both threw a lot of passes too. So you'll see them designated as, you know, quarterback slash halfback or something,
Hmm.
both of them. In fact, I think Hinkie Haynes was designated as the QB the year they won the NFL championship in 27. So he was considered their quarterback, but they both threw the ball. This is the back of a Giants program. And I always like this image of Jack McBride. He just looks so tough there. I mean, you could tell he was a brawler and a bruiser. Um, I always thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, he looks like a
And
hard
then,
ass. Somebody you don't want to go outside with at the bar at night.
yeah, he might have spent some time downtown Philly getting into some fistfights when he was,
Right.
young and spry. And then he has a matchbook as well from 33, which I
That's
think is cool.
that's a Syracuse uniform he has on.
You know, uh, I mean, it's 33, but who knows when that photo was
The
taken?
first thing,
And
if I'm reading
it
upside down, product of
says a
Syracuse
product of
University is
Syracuse.
there's,
Yeah, doesn't
yeah,
say
that's
what the
pretty cool.
uniform is. It's kind of a funky uniform. It does have a lot of orange in it. So, of course,
Yeah.
the Giants had some, orange too, right? For a while. Yeah, I think they might have.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
could have.
Yep. So
Very,
that's
very cool.
his matchbook. which I think was cool.
Yeah, if I'm reading right, they're advertising, size, what, 5'11", 185 pounds. Today that would
Yeah,
be the water boy, I think.
I know, right? Yeah, maybe ball boy.
Yeah.
And then
Very
my
cool.
big piece from 25 is the program from the game. So I've had a couple of these actually. They're not as hard to find as you might imagine, just because there were 70,000 of them. Well, who knows how many people bought the program, but obviously there were a lot of these programs purchased at that game. So, I am working on a run of all of the barnstorming programs from the Red Grange barnstorming tour, that started, right after he graduated. Well, right after he finished his last college game up through early 19,
That and that's a lot
26.
of games. We had Chris Willis of
Yeah.
NFL Films wrote a good nice book on. We had him on and have his book,
Yep.
and great coverage of all those different stops in the Floridas and
Yep.
out west and everywhere else. It was pretty cool. Yeah, that would
Yeah.
be
And
a
I
quite a bucket
collect
list of
some.
items.
Yeah, no, that'd be a fun talk too, is to talk that through that thing. I have quite a few things from that. I don't have a massive amount of programs. I probably have 5 or 6 of them, and I think there was like 18 or 20 barnstorming games. And I've missed on 2 as well. A longtime collector friend, I remember him telling a story about how he missed on something he really wanted. And he said, "Oh well, I'll get it next time it rolls around." And then he said it took 12 years before he saw it again. And his lesson was, if it's something that really, really fits your collection, you really, really want, and it's really, really rare, you better freaking buy it.
Yeah, you
Because
got to
if
buy it
not,
when it's available.
you may never see it again. And I violated that rule twice, and I am still kicking myself because I have never seen either of those programs again. This one you will see. I've had 2 copies of this program. I traded one a few years ago for some other very early NFL programs. But just a great image of Grange on the front, you know.
Hey,
Um,
Jeff, just curious, being going to your collector side, when you have paper products, that were not meant to survive and be 100 years old, like they are, how do you care for those or display them, or are they like locked in way in darkness, or do you have them like matted and framed? How do you display that?
yeah, I don't have any of my programs matted and displayed. I have some big cabinet photos matted and displayed. They're all behind, ultra UV
I
glass.
bet.
If they're, I keep my programs and my other stuff for the most part in binders in the dark. Never see the light of day other than if I pull it out and look at it. But yeah, in acid free, holders and binder pages, you do need to be careful, because I mean, right, 100 years old. This thing is 100 years old,
All right.
you know,
Very
and you
cool.
can see it's gone through the war. Looks like somebody crumpled it up and wadded it in their coat
Spilled a
pocket.
cup of
A
coffee on it on the
I
corner,
know,
maybe.
right? Yeah. Well, it's funny. A lot of those old programs you will see, and they will just have a crease right straight down the middle. Because, of course, back then everybody dressed up to go out, and you can just envision somebody getting a program at the end of the game, fold it in half, stick it in their coat inside pocket, right? I do
All
that with
right.
stuff all the time
Right.
if I have a suit coat on. And it's
Yeah.
just, I think it's kind of cool, right? You're like, oh, I know what happened in this program. I know exactly what this person did. Watch the game and then folded it in half and stuck it in their coat pocket. And here it is today. This
Yeah,
one
like
didn't do that, but it looks like they, I don't know, held it over their head to stop the rain, or I don't know what they did with this thing, but it got beat up a little
yeah, we'll have
bit.
to see what the weather report was on December 6th, 1925 in New York.
Oh, well, I don't know if you heard the story about that, but my understanding was that of course, this was early December. So early December in New York, you could get anything, right? I mean,
Mhm.
that's like playing in Chicago in December. And my understanding from what I read is that the weather coming up to the game was not very good. I don't know if they had a lot of snow, but I know it was cold and they had some precipitation. They had some rain. And what I've heard is that Mara was just nervous as all heck. I mean, he was betting a lot on this game. Of course, he went out there to the Midwest to try to convince Grange to play for the Giants. That didn't work out. It's too late. But kudos to him, he immediately pivoted around and he said, well, next best thing is get him to come to New York for a game. And he got that commitment. And now it's all dependent on the weather, right? And what I heard is it up until the day before, it was not good weather. And sometime that night, the night before the game, skies cleared up, things got nicer out. Still cold, obviously, in New York, but nice day, at least partly sunny. And he woke up and he was just like, thank you, God. I need this. And I read that the Giants made like $140,000 off that game, something like that. Now I don't know if that was the grand total, and then they split it, with Grange and the Bears, or that was their take. But regardless, it more than pulled them out of the hole and gave them a cushion that they could use going forward, which is
Right.
pretty cool.
Signing some of these players that helped them win a championship, but year coming up.
Well, another early trivia is at one point Tim Mara owned at the same time 3 NFL franchises.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I know about one other one other than the Giants, but
yes, my understanding is, obviously he made the decision to buy the Detroit team because he wanted Benny Friedman.
right.
That was the only way he could get them, was they were flailing, but they belonged to Detroit. He was worried somebody else was going to buy him. I think he bought it for like 10 grand. So he bought the Detroit team and took their players. And so now he had 2. And I don't remember what he did with that one. I don't remember if he turned it back in the league eventually, but he had 2. And then the other one was, my understanding is, because of his arrangement with Grange and CC Pyle, when he allowed them to come into the NFL with the other New York team, the Yankees, if I'm remembering that right, that was the 3rd one that he ended up with when CC Pyle decided he didn't want to carry forward with the NFL version of that team after a few years. And he ended up with that one too. And I believe that became the Staten Island Stapletons. Like, he sold that to somebody else to form the Stapletons, because he still owned, of course, the rights in New York. And he was only going to sell it to somebody that, he kind of felt like he controlled, or they weren't, encroaching in territory. But he actually, I read, he had 3 NFL franchises at the same time.
I was just taking a wild guess. I was thinking like maybe the Horsemen, the AFL Horsemen team, because I know they merged with somebody, and I couldn't remember if that was it. But so he had the New York Grange's CC Pyle Yankees in their NFL year. Okay, after that.
I believe that is, so he owned 3 at once, which is kind of freaking crazy.
Yeah.
If you think about it.
Yeah, it is.
From not knowing anything about football to owning basically 3 franchises, 2 of them defunct. Obviously, they weren't playing ball, but he did.
How many people can say that? Because even like Burt
0.
Bell was only part of 2.
Yeah.
He was ownership of 2 different franchises. I can't think of anybody else that.
Well, especially at the same time, right? You could think of like, Ollie Hosgrove, if that's how you pronounce his name, who owned the Eskimos and then negotiated with the NFL. A smart man to have the right to be part owner in a future team in the area. And man, that was a pretty cool move on his part. I can't think of many.
Unless you count like, Irsay trading the with the Rams Colts thing at and the other party on that. I forget their name, but very cool.
Yep. The other thing I thought you might like is, and you may have had somebody else show one of these, but these were season passes. They call them silver passes that the New York Giants sold.
I've never seen that before. That's cool.
Well, I think they stole it from some of the New York baseball teams, because I've seen baseball ones. They're obviously not shaped like this, but they're baseball ones from the mid-20s too, from New York. And I can't remember if they were Yankees or Giants, but same idea, right? A silver pass, with the team on the front. And then on the back, which I think is really cool, is, the name of the person and the number of the pass. And this is for the 1926 season. Now, I've made it a little hobby. Every time one of these comes up, I go on newspapers.com to see if I can figure out who the heck this person was, right? I did track down Mr. Trumbull. As you would imagine, if you were buying a season pass, you probably had some cash in 26. So it wasn't actually that hard to find the ones that I've seen, because they tend to be people who are at least somewhat well known or affiliated with sports in the New York area. Mr. Trumbull was a newspaper columnist for one of the papers. I've read some of his articles from back in 25, 26. It's clearly him, which is kind of cool. I think he was in Brooklyn. Is that where he was at? Yeah, I think it was Brooklyn. I've seen one for John McGraw, manager for the
Okay.
New York,
Yeah.
baseball team
The baseball
back
giants. Yeah.
back in the day. I've seen one for him, so he was clearly a season ticket holder. And I've seen one for a judge. So I tracked him down from some of the court cases, his name. Yeah, so it's just a little kind of cool,
Now,
you
how
know.
large is this actually? Is this like the size of a coin or,
Yeah, it's I have it blown up here so you can see. I'd say it's about, oh, it's hard to tell on the screen, but yeah, like how you put those coins in a machine and stretch them out. It's
hmm
not that small. They're bigger than that, but they're
and,
probably 2 to 2 inches long, 1 inch
very,
high, maybe a little bigger than that. Nice
and, and,
size.
and they're like pure silver, or is it just
You know
silver in
what? I
color?
don't. I do not know what they're. Well, there's a mark down there. I don't know. They call them silver passes. I do not know if they're actual silver or not.
Heck, that'd
They're
be a
hard.
pretty expensive token to be carrying to a football game. Say, okay, I'm here for my
I know,
seat.
right?
I want the gate.
Well, pretty expensive tickets to be, producing for your
Right.
fans too. These are hard to get, and they're hard to get because when they do show up, they go for some cash. I mean,
I'll
people,
bet.
probably Giants fans really like these, and they do not show up. I've only seen, like I said, a handful of them through the years, and they're hard to get. I took 3 or 4 runs at them before I finally was able to get one. Um, I just think they're cool. It's
Yeah,
a cool
that's really
cool
neat. I've
giant.
never seen or heard of those before. That is neat.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. So I think that's my stuff from the Giants, early Giants, memorabilia wise. I have later stuff, some Friedman things and other things, of course, into the 30s. But in terms of the first couple of years of the Giants,
Very,
that's the
very
stuff I've been
cool.
able to track down.
Yeah, those are. I mean, that's great. I mean, we've talked about some of these folks, but you shared some different stories about them. We saw some different images of them from your collection. Learned some new things like the silver, pass that you had, and
Mm,
that's all great stuff. And the matchbook, I've never seen that before. That's some really neat stuff that they used to make.
yep, absolutely. Yeah, I love trying to find images of pro players, from the early days, because there weren't a lot of cards back then. There weren't many card sets, so there's no tops, there's no Bowman, there's none of that stuff out there. So you got to kind of really dig to find things, whether it's photos or matchbooks or pins or backs of programs, fronts of programs. There's just not that many images for a lot of these players,
But
from that era.
it seems like advertisers love to use their images though. Like you had the Mother's Bread, and
Yep.
it was what was the matchbook? Probably a cigarette company or something.
Yeah.
I'm guessing.
Diamond matchbooks. Yep.
Yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. Real cool.
Yeah,
Uh,
and I do have some. When Grange came to New York City, I know the story is, one of the ways that Mara enticed him and the Bears and whatnot to come play that game was, he's like, hey, New York City, advertising capital of the world, you can sign endorsement deals there, and my understanding is Grange and Pyle either came a day early or stayed a day later, and just basically set up in the hotel and we're like, just bring it, whatever you want Grange to endorse, you come and pitch it, and we'll take the best deals. And apparently, they signed up a lot of endorsement deals while they were in New York City.
yeah,
A
but yeah, they're like some
meatloaf, I heard,
candy
which is
bars. I think I've
crazy.
seen
Of course,
before.
Shotwell, yeah, the
Yeah,
Shotwell candy bars, which the movie came out of that. The movie, came out of that as well, associated with the Shotwells. I think that was actually a Kennedy production, right? Wasn't it? Joe Kennedy. I think Joe Kennedy produced the
Really?
movie
Oh.
1 Minute to
Hmm.
Play, which was the Grange movie, and Shotwell was the sponsor for that movie because then they produced
Huh.
those great card sets of Grange, the ad backs
Yeah.
and the blank backs from the movie. Yeah, so I think I don't remember what I heard Grange ended up with endorsement deal wise out of that New York City trip, but it was a lot. He raked it up, including the meatloaf story. I love the meatloaf. I've never seen anything with Grange's picture on a meatloaf before. So I kind of wonder how that all went down, but apparently that was one of the endorsement deals that he signed was to
What was it, like
endorse a
a
meatloaf.
tin in the shape of his head, or
I don't know.
you put your
I've never
meatloaf in
seen a
it?
piece.
You want your meatloaf to look like a football player? Here we go.
Yeah, I mean the Shotwell wrappers are out there, the Shotwell cards are out there. There's movie placards. I have a big kind of broadside
Yeah.
advertisement for that movie hanging up in my basement that I picked up somewhere. So a lot of those endorsement deals, there's stuff out there to grab, and I love grabbing advertisement type stuff with football on it. But I've never seen the meatloaf. I don't know what happened with that one. You know.
Yeah, probably not any of them left. Probably got eaten or thrown away by
Yeah,
now.
I know, right? You're gonna keep a
Uh,
meatloaf
yeah, I
can?
don't want to smell
What are you gonna
100-year-old
do with
meatloaf.
that? I know. I have a couple of the Shotwell boxes that the candy bars came in
Okay.
as well.
Yeah,
Yeah, those are floating around out there. You'll see them
they got
once
to
in a
be
while.
rare.
They're pretty rare. They're pretty rare, but they, once in a while one will pop up, eBay or at auction or whatever. More so than the wrappers do. The wrappers you never see.
Huh.
They're really hard to find. And there's different varieties. I think it's 4 or 5 different versions of the wrapper that are out there. I think I have 3 or 4 of them. Never
Wow.
found them all. They're impossible to find. Always on the prowl. One came up actually. I think it was on eBay sometime in the last couple of months, but it was one I already had. So
I mean,
yeah,
who would have thought when some kid's eating a candy bar and tossing it away that someday somebody would want that and
I
have it as a
know,
piece of the
right?
collection and pay big money for it. That's something
I
is
know.
one
Well,
man's treasure is another man's trash, or however it goes.
one cool thing that came out of that was there's always been a debate about which card is Red Grange's earliest card? Is it
Okay.
the strip card that was produced? Is it the Shotwell sets that was produced? Is it the Star Player Candy? Is it the Spalding / Sports Company America? All those were produced in the 20s at some point, obviously mid to late 20s, but nobody knows for sure when those were actually produced. And for a long time, you know, it was felt like the Star Player Candy, which um, one of the grading companies has as 1925. One of them has as 1928. It could be a range too, right? Nobody knows because the problem is the card says he's with Illinois on the card, so everybody's like, well, it can't be after 25. But it wasn't uncommon, of course, back then for the makers of cards to put their college designations on players' cards because college was just so much more popular than the pros were. And so I don't know if that necessarily means that cards from 1925. I know that some of the other players in the shot or in the Star Player Candy set, like a couple of the cards designate the player as captain, and that person wasn't a captain until 1928 for their
Hmm.
team in college. So they were at least produced until 1928. And so, one of the grading companies has it as 25 because of the Grange. Somebody else has it 28 because some of the cards couldn't have been produced before then. Who knows when, but there's always been this debate about when these cards were produced. But one interesting thing is, so a lot of people say, well, the Star Player Candy, because of the 28 cards that are in there, people tend to think maybe it was a little later, and they just put Grange as Illinois because he was so well known for that. But then you have was it when did the Shotwell Candy come out? Did it come out before the movie was produced? Because the movie came out in, I think it was the fall of 26. It was filmed during the summer of 26. Um, and if you heard that story, like they needed people in the stands, but it had to be cold, so they paid people. No, they didn't even pay them. CC Powell, I think, came up with the idea of they told people they could come in and watch an exhibition of football if you wear a winter coat during the game. And it was in like LA in the summer. And all these people showed up for free football and they scrimmaged as part of this movie production. And they got all these people to come for free and wear coats like it was cold out. Which
In
is
LA.
really a great idea, right? So a lot of people are like, well, when did this come out? And could the Shotwells be the earliest? But long story short, one of the wrappers I bought was taken, it was removed from a scrapbook. And on the back of the wrapper, still attached to the wrapper from the back side of the scrapbook, was a piece of a box score from a baseball game. All right. And I was like, okay, I'm going to figure out when this game was played. Is this a 1925 game? Is this a 1926 game? What month? And then I'll be able to know at least, right? When was this candy bar purchased at least?
Mm-hmm.
And I did track it down through a lot of heavy lifting. It was a World Series game in 26. So it was played in October of 26. So I at least know the candy bars, at least were being produced during that time frame. Around October of 26, which was right around when the movie came out. So they probably coincided, the release of
And
the
it
candy bars
coincided
with
with
the movie.
the AFL Yankees, Red Green Yankees,
Well, yeah,
original
exactly.
AFL
Yep.
that season. Very
So yeah,
cool.
that was kind of cool. So I kind of know when those were produced. Subsequently learned that you can tell based on some nuances of the strip cards that were produced, which year they were produced. And the Grange one was produced in 1925. So I kind of lean toward the Grange strip card, black and white strip card that's out there that you see occasionally as being probably his oldest card, but nobody's certain on that,
Hey, that's the fun part of collecting and
I know, right?
like in history when you have those controversies and there's not really any answer
Hmm.
that's definitive, that it makes for great debate and stories and great listening
Exactly.
for people like myself and the listener. So
Yep.
that's cool stuff. It probably drives you crazy, but we love it.
Ah, it's all good. It's not life or death, right? I always say it's just collecting. It's nothing to get
Right,
worked up about, You have
right.
your opinion, I have mine. You have your facts, I have mine. We agree to disagree. Whatever. It's just a hobby. It's just fun.
Yeah. Yeah, and
So
so maybe with that thought, let's segue in. You have run a forum that has some of the best football minds and historians of our day, because most of them are collectors and know,
yeah.
just like yourself, know a lot about the pieces they collect. So, when you're throwing down some cash on some things, you want to have some back history on it. So, why don't you share with folks, maybe they'd be interested in too in joining, or looking at some of the stuff too that's being shared on our collectors forum.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Thanks, Darren. Yeah. So I run Vintage Football Community. It's a football only community of, I always say collectors, hobbyists, and researchers, because we have all sorts. You mentioned Chris Willis earlier, who's written a bunch of books. I love all his books on football. And he's a member. He does some collecting, but he's more known for his research and his books and whatever. And if you're gonna really understand some of these items and their context, you need people who really know football.
Mm-hmm.
Timothy Brown, who obviously is another person that sticks out to me as being somebody who just drills into subjects and knows so much about so many things,
And
that
and
having people like that around, the people on our group always say not a week goes by that you don't see something in the hobby you've never seen before. And it is so true. It's true for
exactly,
me. Every week I'm like, wow, I've never seen that before. I cannot believe that exists. And it's great because people will post something and say, hey, I don't know what this is, right? We have that one We have one thread that's the unsolved. We call it unsolved mysteries.
And Tim has commented multiple times. That's his favorite thing. He
Oh,
loves it when those come up, and he
I know.
gets digging. He loves that.
Yeah, and there's lots of people that do a lot of digging, right? I mean, they'll see something and they'll be like, I think I know where to look for this. And within a couple days, often, not always, like some stuff you just can't find, but people will dig in and find stuff and pop up context for it. What, like I was just doing some research on early Black players, pro players, and it reminded me that I had this photo of an all Black team, and it had a banner, but it was really hard to read it, and I could not figure out what this team was. And finally, I gave up and I posted it to, VFC, in that channel, and within a day or two, somebody had it, right? They're like, oh, here's what it is. And what struck me was they mentioned in the article I was reading that the first game between two Black teams, college teams, historically Black universities, was played between Biddle and Livingston University. I think they were in North Carolina or somewhere in the South. And this is a photo, not as old as that game, of Biddle. They had changed their name, so on the pennant that was really hard to read, it had the new name of their college, but the ball had LC for Livingston College. So they clearly had taken this after they'd beaten their arch rival, who they played the first game between historically Black colleges. Here's a picture. I think it was from the teens, so it was 15 or so years after the first time they played. But I never would have known what that was if it wasn't for VFC.
Right.
And we just, it's also a place that collectors can share and talk about stuff and enjoy each other. People that appreciate your stuff, right? I don't know about you, but most people I know, they don't appreciate any of this stuff.
No, yeah, right.
They glaze over. You start talking about it, they start glazing over.
You have to get in a group of football nerds like the VFC is. That's
exactly.
That's our place, our safe place that we can all enjoy each other's company and collections and the history. So, great forum, great place.
And always looking for new members. It's free. Just drop me a line and send it through Darren if anybody's interested. We're always looking for more people. The more the merrier. The more contacts, the more people showing different things. It's just a great place to kind of enjoy the hobby. So, and we always do something. Anyone's going to the National this year, which is Mecca for me. I went when it came to Baltimore in right around 2011, 2012, when it was in Baltimore. That was my first National. I was just getting back into the hobby. And it was local, so I was like, I'll run up and I'll check this thing out I've heard about, and I just fell in love with it. I've been there every year since, other than obviously COVID year when they didn't have it. And I've already said I'm going to go there until they can't wheel me there anymore. I just love it, and it's not even the content there. I mean, you see so much great stuff, but it's just catching up with people and seeing so many people and talking about so much stuff, and it's almost like a reunion at this point. And anybody that's going to Cleveland this year, definitely look me up. And if you're interested in VFC, let Darren know. I'd love to have you.
Well, very cool. Jeff, we appreciate you sharing these stories, the information you have, helping to preserve the football history and helping us celebrate this New York Giants 100th season as well. And we can't thank you enough, and appreciate your time.
Thank you. Happy birthday, Giants fans. It's a great accomplishment, 100 years.
Peeking up at the clock, the time's running down. We're going to go into victory formation, take a knee, and let this baby run out. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you back tomorrow for the next podcast. We invite you to check out our website, pigskindispatch.com, not only to see the daily football history, but to experience positive football with our many articles on the good people of the game, as well as our own football comic strip, Cleat Marks Comics. Pigskindispatch.com is also on social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all of your positive football news and history. A special thanks to the talents of Mike and Gene Monroe, as well as Jason Neff for letting us use their music during our podcast.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.